In 2003, Capcom released Clock Tower 3 in the West, hoping to make one of their longest-running horror franchises a success. The game went on to get below-average sales, but establish a small and dedicated fanbase. At the end of its first year of worldwide release, it had sold just around 120,000 units, well under their projections of 450,000. The game was a commercial failure. With a formula already created to make a fun and engaging horror adventure, Capcom didn't exactly want to give up on what they were building. But the writing was already on the walls. Clock Tower was dead, and it was time to move on. The formula they created for Clock Tower they would lift, expand, and refine to use in a new game called Haunting Ground. The similarities found between Clock Tower and Haunting Ground in terms of its exploration, its enemies, the gameplay, and our main heroine caused many people to believe that this was a spiritual successor to the Clock Tower games, although nobody involved with its development has ever made a statement indicating as much. A few references to the Clock Tower games can be found here and there, such as using clocks to save, the emblematic spiral staircases, and what at first appears to be an origin story for one of the series' main antagonists. But at the end of the day, these don't amount to anything substantial enough to refer to them as more than just references. As it is, Haunting Ground was just a one-off game, with no real implicit relationship to anything else despite appearances. Haunting Ground wouldn't release in the West until 2005, when the current console generation and survival horrors overall were in a steep decline. Sales expectations weren't high, and mixed to average reviews would prove that they didn't need to be. Haunting Ground released in limited quantity, and as a result, has caused the game to slip into obscurity, now only remembered by horror enthusiasts and collectors. Its limited supply and collector's appeal over the years has caused the game's price to skyrocket in the aftermarket, and the longer this seems to have gone on, the better the game's reputation appears to have got. But is Haunting Ground really something special, or is it just something expensive? Well, those taken years, I did finally get myself a copy, and I have played through it. And this is how I feel about it. Starting with the story, we have a much stronger through point for the main narrative than the previous Clock Tower game had. We play as Fiona. We awake first in a dingy little cage. A deranged and perverted Quasimodo-looking butcher is cutting meat close by. Through flashbacks, we see that we were recently involved in a car crash, surmising that from there we were abducted and taken prisoner. It doesn't take long to escape and find that this tiny cage was part of a small cell on the premises of a large castle. Inside the castle, we find some of its residents who immediately strike an off tone with the player. Quasimodo meets Sloth from the Goonies here is unsettling in a pretty base way. A scary, large man with simple desires that he'll pursue with little thought to propriety or gentleness. He's not an evil man exactly, his innocence and lack of worldly understanding just makes him incredibly dangerous, like an untrained ape. Daniela, on the other hand, offers a little bit more. This robot-like woman speaks almost entirely in monotone.
Yes, Master. We will keep her here for a while. I will make sure she stays comfortable.
Yet it's clear that beneath this air of uncaring, she holds an insecurity close to her heart, one that breeds jealousy towards Fiona and makes us an unwilling enemy of hers. Throughout the game, these characters, as well as a couple others, will serve as our stalkers. They roam the castle, and if they cross paths with you, they will hunt you down, each one offering a unique sort of approach to the terror their personalities instill. But more on that later. Inside the castle, we're presented with clothes and a room to stay in, and will seemingly be taken care of here. But of course, escape is the main agenda and the purpose of Haunting Ground from its beginning to its end. As we try to escape, we must also uncover the mystery of our car crash and the purpose of our abduction, as well as the strange going-ons within and around the castle estate, as the things seen here are anything but ordinary. Strange rooms with incredible looking set pieces, science experiments, magic from dark ages, traps galore, and the mystery of the Azoth and the luminescence. This castle appears to be designed for anything but leisurely living. More than anything, it seems it was designed specifically to hold us here as prisoner. And without the help of a special friend, a prisoner is exactly what we would remain. It doesn't take long, but we eventually find the big gimmick of the game, and easily one of its strongest draws. Chained painfully to a tree, we find Huey, A cute little doggo who deserves all the pets. And a doggo as well who would cause years upon years of this game being compared to a drastically different survival horror game called Rule of Rose. Upon freeing said doggo, Huey joins us in our cause and will become one of the main gameplay mechanics, helping us to reach new destinations and keep our attackers at bay. It's worth noting as well that this game, playing host to many different endings, has its endings tied to how you treat Huey and how much injury he faces over the course of the game. So treat Huey like the best boy and nothing less, so far as you are able. Beyond this, there's not too much to explain. You journey from one area of the castle to the next, navigating through traps and puzzles while being stalked by different people. When I set out to play this game, I had the idea of making a sort of Haunting Ground explained kind of video, but upon beating it, there's really nothing here that warrants further explanation. The backstory is a bit piecemealed together at first, with much of it being told through collected journals and diaries, and while using a heavy amount of strange new terminology. But by the end of it all, it's explained pretty darn clearly. I won't get into spoiling this game, as old as it is. There is a twist or two along the way that knowing going in might take away some of the biggest reasons to play it. The plot and villain motives are definitely a bit out there in a way that's not entirely easy to take seriously, but at no point does it ever feel goofy like the Clock Tower games did. And I gotta say, from a narrative approach, the plot ideas and how they're unfolded, this is leagues better than Clock Tower 3 and feels much more realized and whole as a result. And although the story leaves a little something to be desired, it's very clearly an improvement over the developer's previous work, and thankfully the improvements don't stop there. When it comes to the gameplay, Haunting Ground picks up what Clock Tower was putting down, and it turns it into something much more engaging and attractive. Combat isn't exactly on the table in Haunting Ground, and Fiona's controls are pretty standard. Right stick to move, X to run, circle to investigate, triangle to throw or drop an item, L1 to crouch, and R1 to backstep. You do have a kick mapped to square and a tackle which is used by hitting square while running, but to call this combat would be generous. The kick can affect enemies and it will give you a narrow window to escape them with, but for the most part it will be used to break down environment objects, hopefully to find a hidden item inside. Or at the worst of times, your kick can be used to scold your dog. Not recommended. Especially since your doggo is your best hope of escaping a dangerous situation. With the left stick, you can give Huey a small set of commands, and what your commands prompt him to do will vary depending on whether or not you're in a combat situation. Pushing up in a combat situation will command him to attack, for instance, but outside of combat, it's a command search. Down will instruct him to stop attacking or call him over to you. Pushing R3 is a sit or stay command. Right will praise the dog and help him recover some stamina, while pushing left will scold him, which affects his responsiveness. Haunting Ground employs a sort of mechanic we don't see too often in video games, and in recent memory, only The Last Guardian really comes to mind. Despite being able to react to many of your commands, Huey isn't exactly the most obedient dog, and this can lead to some real frustrations. Sometimes he'll just stop following you or flat out stop responding to your commands. Periodically, he's kind of an asshole. Through a balance of praising when he does something good and scolding when he's being disobedient, you are meant to build a repertoire with him, to train him, and in doing so, he'll become more obedient as the game goes along. I don't exactly have the heart to scold even a fictional dog, and the couple times I'd done it just by hitting the wrong button certainly didn't make me feel the best, so my experience with Huey wasn't exactly the most solid. This is entirely my own fault for not playing as intended, but I was able to get through the game without too much effort in this department, and Huey was generally reliable in the times I needed him most. Those times being when an enemy is in seemingly relentless pursuit of me. The stalkers in this game have a habit of showing up more than welcome, especially in the first arc of the game, making progression feel slow and annoying. So many times when just trying to get into a single particular room, I found myself running face first into a stalker, then having to backtrack around the entirety of the accessible map to find a hiding point or get far enough away that the aggro drops, all while commanding Huey to attack him and hold him back. Often, if I did manage to hide and get away, before I could make it back to the room that I needed to enter, the stalker would show up again. This is a rare time where I would honestly just take a few scripted events broken up by uneventful exploration, It seemed like the relentless engagement was meant to make the game more exciting, but the constant enemy aggro did not work to this game's benefit at all, instead dragging out and down the entire first arc of the game. The enemy's speed is generally comparable to your own, but an unseen stamina bar plays a huge role here. You can't just run forever. Fiona will tire out and slow down, and when she does, you can expect the attacks will come. Like your stamina bar, your life bar isn't exactly visible either, but there are plenty of visual cues to tell you when you're close to dying. In fact, they throw seemingly every video effect and filter they know at you when the going gets rough. Lifting this idea straight from their Clock Tower series, when being attacked you will gradually lose more and more control over your character. First with her getting clumsy in her steps, and eventually not being able to walk or properly interpret the world around her. This removal of control I find to be one of the strongest elements in this game's approach to horror, establishing a sort of parallel between the character on screen and the player at home, both losing control in a scary situation. When you are down like this, your only real hope of escape is that Huey can keep the enemy back long enough for you to recover, or by sheer stroke of luck, the enemy just gets distracted. As I mentioned earlier, you can hide from the enemies or use environment objects to hold them up, but most of the environment obstacles are very limited in use, and the hiding places are often difficult to take advantage of, and become less reliable the more you use them. When you do pass the first arc of the game, the stalkers seem to pop up less and less, and while that might sound like a bad thing to some people, as they are the only legitimate enemy in the game, it works to the game's benefit, making every chase feel impactful and engaging, rather than annoying. The downtime in Hunting Ground is what I cherish the most, just exploring and looking at things. This game really has no shortage of amazing and interesting set pieces that just make a curious mind wander. Like Clock Tower, the game does play out on fixed camera angles and with traditional third-person controls. And like every other game with this setup, it still has that issue of poor camera angle compensation. When you run from one angle into another, holding one direction may send you in a different direction on the next screen. Hunting Ground compensates for this by making your character have a delayed reaction to your control input when entering a new screen. As you enter a new screen, the direction will slowly recalibrate, with you expected to calibrate around it as well. It's jarring and it's a bit janky, but it's certainly better than having the control orientation flip immediately like Parasite Eve 1 did. This is one of the reasons why I swear by tank controls on fixed camera angles. That said, this compensation is handled much better than most games of the time, and slightly better than what they had in Clock Tower 3. And it doesn't in any way make the game unplayable, just a little frustrating from time to time, especially where much of your gameplay is spent running around in a frenzy, requiring accurate and immediate responses to your inputs. Hunting Ground does have a small handful of bosses, and thankfully they don't pull any magical girl transformation stuff so that you can fight them one-on-one. Rather, they're puzzle-oriented in nature, usually requiring you to just interact with the environment objects right to overcome the challenge. This can make it so that playing through on harder difficulties doesn't really make the game any more challenging, but I think with a game of this sort, I prefer it to traditional combat. It's probably worth noting as well that there's really light RPG elements in the game by the way of accessory equips that grant you benefits and stat boosts. There's even a weird kind of crafting system that works more like a slot machine. Insert some material into this device here and hit buttons when the colors scroll by. What colors you land on will determine your prize, or rather it will determine what you just crafted. I absolutely suck at this, having only pulled off good results a handful of times, and only then by pushing buttons without looking at the screen. Otherwise, some control issues and the early on annoyances aside, Hunting Ground really is a compelling little adventure. The plot doesn't unfold too fast or get too deep or crazy. The locations aren't so massive that you become disoriented, or so small that you grow tired of them quickly. You have a great companion to play alongside, even if he isn't the most cooperative partner in the world. And there's just a lot to take in and immerse yourself in visually. The enemies in the game aren't exactly as scary as I feel they were meant to be, and the game in general I wouldn't really say is scary either. But there are small things here and there in the descriptions of what you're seeing that do rather effectively unsettle you. Also, these little guys here. You come across them a few times in the game, but the first time I seen one, I just didn't know how to approach him. I didn't know what to expect. They just stand there mumbling incoherently to themselves. You can't even interact with them, but just seeing them there like lifeless husks and not knowing what might happen when you come up to them, it really made navigating around them for the first time really intense. Now, I'm not really much of a graphics guy, but Hunting Ground really does show the power and capabilities of the PlayStation 2. And I'll also say that a leap in graphical fidelity and interactivity made Hunting Grounds a lot more attractive than it would have been otherwise. One thing that really stood out for me on my adventure was the ability to just go around, look at, and interact with almost every set piece you see. The paintings in particular around the castle really caught my eye, but the good visuals don't just end with a few set pieces. Character models look incredible for a PlayStation 2 game, let alone one that wasn't expected to make that much money. The cloth physics here really stand out too. Not only is Fiona's costume work great, but the way it moves and reacts to your movements gives it that added edge of realism to help suck you in, even if some over-the-top breast physics threaten to push you out. And it's not that I mind the physics, it's part of the plot in many ways that Fiona is objectified, and the clothing that's been given to her is very much an extension of that. The reminder of her objectification doesn't come off as misplaced itself, it's just a bit more extreme than I feel they needed to go. Good set design and eye-catching visuals can and do make a huge difference in some games, especially those looking to capitalize on specific types of atmospheres. And atmosphere is something I think Hunting Ground hits very well. The music plays a huge role in making this all come together, and I gotta say the music here, though used sparingly, is pretty darn good. Daniela's theme really stuck out to me. Like a machine glitching out and breaking down, yet still functioning enough to pose a real serious threat. What little voice acting exists in the game is substantially better than what we've seen in Clock Tower 3, and again shows how Hunting Ground is a fantastic evolution and improvement on nearly everything that the last game set out for it.
There you are, boy. Huey. Thank you, Huey.
If you happened to really like Clock Tower 3, like if you think it might rank among one of your favorite horrors, then you may find Hunting Ground to be a near-perfect game. For me, Clock Tower 3 was an alright game, and Hunting Ground is an even better one. Though I would definitely hesitate to say that it was amazing overall. Sure, some good tunes, set pieces, visuals, and of course one heckin' good doggo hold it up a great deal, but what exists outside of this, I honestly feel is just around average. The story bounces along at a decent pace, but a lack of depth left it underwhelming on a narrative front. The combat being non-existent was never a problem, but the over-reliance on some of the stalkers made some segments drastically overstay their welcome, making progression through zones more annoying than it needed to be at times. Ultimately, the stalkers just got in the way of one of the game's biggest pros: stopping to smell the roses. With a few changes, this game could have been great, but as it is, it's a compelling enough mystery with a conclusion that's just a little bit silly and underwhelming. Hunting Ground made advancements to better highlight the good parts of Clock Tower, while dialing back on the bad parts, but didn't quite take it as far as it needed to go. As it is, I think I stand with the initial reception this game received at launch. Hunting Ground is definitely a curiosity among horror enthusiasts, and a holy grail to any collector's library. But as a game, it's really only just around average, maybe a bit above. I said Clock Tower was pretty good, and I would say that Hunting Ground is, just a little bit better. It's just not exactly spectacular. It was a more positive experience than a negative one, but it could have been so much more, and I'm kind of sad that it wasn't. Capcom was getting themselves somewhere, but stopped just short of the mark. In my Clock Tower video, I said that they could probably revive that series and make it work today. And with the lessons I've seen they learned with Hunting Ground, I feel the next game they would have made with these ideas would have been the one to finally get it all right and become a true staple in survival horror history. Sadly, Capcom just didn't make it there. Hunting Ground effectively ended the Clock Tower style of gameplay. And with Clock Tower having died just a short while before this came out, the progenitors of this kind of gameplay, this little subgenre of horror, are effectively wiped off the map. Indie devs sometime later would pick up and popularize the ideas that we seen presented in this game and Clock Tower 3. Unfortunately for Capcom, maybe they were just a little too early to the punch. The world just wasn't quite ready for this sort of thing, and the ideas weren't quite refined enough yet. I don't think these games deserved to be the failures that they were, not by a long shot. But on the opposite side of the token, it's not like they're exactly the best things out there. In terms of must-play horrors, you could do a lot worse, but you can easily, and more cheaply, do better. And that's all I'm going to say on Haunting Ground, ladies and gentlemen. If you guys like this video, this little look back, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, and share the video if you can. Links to all my socials are in the description below, and as always folks, thanks for watching.